When I was 18 years old, I saw, for the first time in my life, I saw an image of clarity. I saw a comic strip, a 3-panel comic strip, that, though simple as it seemed, changed me, changed my being, changed who I am, made me who I am, enlightened me. The strip, Garfield. The comic strip is new, no more than maybe a month and a half since inception, since coming into existence. And there it was before me in print. I saw it. A comic strip. What was it called? Garfield. The story here is of a man. A plain man. He is John. But he is more than that. I'll get to this later. But first, let us say that he's John. A plain man. And then there it is. A cat. Garfield. This is the nature of the world here. When I see the world, the politics, the future, the satellites in space, and the people who put them there, you can look at everything as a man and a cat, 2 beings in harmony, and at war. So this strip I saw, this man, John, and the cat Garfield, you see, yes, it is about everything. This little comic is, oh, lo and behold, not so little anymore. So yes, when I was 18 I saw this comic, and it hit me all at once. Its power. I clipped it, and every day I looked at it, and I said, okay, let me look at this here. What is this doing to me? Why is this so powerful? John Arbuckle sits here, legs crossed, comfortable at his home, and he reads the newspaper, the news of the world perhaps, and then he extends his fingers lightly, delicately. He taps his finger on an end table. He feels for something. What is it? It is something he needs, but it is not there. And then he looks up, slightly cockeyed, and he thinks, his newspaper's in his lap now. He thinks this. Now where could my pipe be? This. I always come to this, because when I was a young man, I'm older now, and I still don't have the secrets, the answers, so this question still rings true. John looks up and he thinks, now where could my pipe be? And then it happens, you see it. You see, it's almost like divine intervention. Suddenly, it is there, and it overpowers you. A cat is smoking a pipe. It is a man's pipe. It's John's pipe. But the cat, this cat, Garfield, is smoking the pipe. And from afar, someplace near but not clear, the man calls out, John calls out. He is shocked. Garfield, he shouts. Garfield, the cat's name. But let's take a step back. Let us examine this from all sides, all perspectives. And when I first came across this comic strip, I was at my father's house. A newspaper had arrived, and I picked it up for him, and brought it inside. I organized its sections for him, and then, yes, the comic strip section fell out from somewhere in the middle, and landed on the kitchen floor. I picked up the paper edges, and saw, up, somewhere near the top of the strip, just like John, I was wearing an aquamarine shirt. Ah, so I thought, interesting. I'll have to see to this later. I snipped out the little comic, and held on to it, and 5 days later, I re-examined it, and it gripped me. I needed to find out more about this. The information I had was minimal, but enough. An orange cat named Garfield. Okay. That seemed to be the linchpin of this whole operation, yes. Another clue. A signature in the bottom right. A man's name. Jim Davis. Yes. I'm onto it for sure. So, 1. Garfield, orange cat, and 2. Jim Davis, the creator of this cat. And that curiously plain man. I did not know it at the time that his name was John. The strip, you see, had no mention of this man's name, and I'd never seen it before. But I had these clues. Jim Davis, Garfield. And then I saw more. I spotted the tiny copyright mark in the upper left corner. Copyright 1978 to... what is this? Copyright belongs to a Paws Incorporated? I used the local library and mail services to track down the information I was looking for. Jim Davis a cartoonist, had created a comic strip about a cat, Garfield, and a man, John Arbuckle. Well, from that point on, I made sure I read the Garfield comic strips, though, as I read each one, as each day passed, the strips seemed to resonate with me less and less. I sent letters to Paws Incorporated, long letters, pages upon pages, asking if Mr. Jim Davis could somehow publish just the one comic over and over again. It would be meditative, I wrote. The strength of that, could you imagine? But no response. The strips lost their power, and eventually I stopped reading. But I did not want my perceptions diluted, so I vowed to read the pipe strip over and over again. That is what I call it. The pipe strip. The pipe strip. Everything about it is perfect. I can only describe it as a miracle creation. Something came together, the elements aligned. It is like the comets, the cosmic orchestra that is up there above your head. The immense, enormous void is all working for one thing, to tell you one thing. Gas and rock and purity and nothing. I will say this. When I see the pipe strip, and I mean every time I look at the lines, the colors, the shapes that make up the 3-panel comic, I see perfection. Do I find perfection in many things? Some things, I would say. Some things are perfect. And this is one of them. I can look at the little tuft of hair on John Arbuckle's head. It is the perfect shade, the purple pipe in Garfield's mouth. How could a mere mortal even make this? I have a theory about Jim Davis. After copious research, and yes, of course, now we have the internet and all this information is readily available, but Jim Davis, he used his life experiences to influence his comic. Like I mentioned before, none of them seem to have the weight of the pipe strip. But you have to wonder about the man who is able to even just once create the perfect form, a literally flawless execution of art. Brilliance. Just as in a ward. His tail curls round. It's more than shapes, too, because okay, stay with me. I've done this experiment several times. You take the strip. You trace only the basic elements. You can do anything. You can simplify the shapes down to just blobs, just outlines, but it still makes sense. You can replace the blobs with magazine cutouts of other things. Replace John Arbuckle with a car parked in a driveway sideways. Cut that out of a magazine, stick it in, replace him there in the second panel with a food processor. Okay. Then we put a picture of the planet in the third panel over Garfield. It still works. There are universal proportions. I don't know how best to explain why it works. I've studied the pipe strip and analyzed John and Garfield's proportions against several universal mathematical constants. E, pi, the golden ratio, Feynman constants, and so on. And it's surprising, scary even, how things align. You can take just tiny pieces of the pipe strip, for instance. Take John's elbow from the second panel, and take that, and project it over John's entire shape in the second panel, and you'll see a near-perfect Fibonacci sequence emerge. It's eerie to me, and it makes you wonder if you're in the presence of a deity, if there's some larger hand at work. There's no doubt in my mind that Jim Davis is a smart man. Jim Davis is capable of anything to me. He is remarkable. But this is so far beyond that. I think we might see that this work of art is revered and respected in years to come. Jim Davis is possibly a new master of the craft, a genius of the eye. They very well may say the same things about Jim Davis in 500 years that we say the same about great philosophical and artistic masters from centuries ago. Jim Davis is a modern-day Socrates or Da Vinci, mixing both striking visual beauty with classical, daring unheard of intellect. Look. He combines these things to make profoundly simple expressions. This strip is his masterpiece. The pipe strip is his masterpiece, and it is a masterpiece and a marvel. I often look at Garfield's particular pose in this strip. He is poised, statuesque, and his cat's stare is reminiscent of the fiery gazes often found in religious iconography. But still, his eyes are playful, lying somewhere between the solemn father's expressions in Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son and the coy smirk of Da Vinci's St. John the Baptist. His ears stick up, signifying a piqued readiness. It's as if he could at any moment pounce. He is, after all, a close relative and descendant of the mighty jungle cats of Africa that could leap after prey. You could see the power drawn into Garfield's hindquarters, powerful haunches indeed. The third panel. And I'm just saying this now. This is just coming to me now. The third panel of the pipe strip is essentially a microcosm for the entire strip itself. All the power dynamics, the struggle for superiority, right? Who has the pipe? Where is the pipe? All of that is drawn, built, layered into Garfield's iconic pose here. You can see it in the curl of his tail. Garfield's ears and whiskers stick up on end. The smoke billows upwards, drawing the eye upward, increasing the scope. I'm just amazed, really, that after 33 years of reading and analyzing the same comic strip, I'm able to find new dimensions. It's a testament to the work. For 6 years, I delved into tobacco research because, can a cat smoke? It's a metaphysical question. Yes. Can any cat smoke? Do we know? Can just Garfield smoke? The research says no. Nicotine poisoning can kill animals, especially household pets. All it takes is the nicotine found in as little as a single cigarette. Effects of aging on acute... sorry, I'm just reading off my notes. Surely John's pipe holds a substantial amount of tobacco. And it is true that pets living in the homes of smokers are nearly 25% more likely to develop some form of cancer, most likely due to secondhand smoke. But these facts of our smoking and its tolls on our world. But after visiting 2 tobacco processing plants in Virginia and the Philip Morris cigarette manufacturing facility, I came no closer to cracking the meaning. I was looking for any insight. A detective of a homicide case has to look at every angle, so I'm always taking apart the pipe strip. I focused on every minute, every detail of this strip. Jon Arbuckle's clothing. I have replicas. I'm an expert in textiles, so you see, this smoking thing was a hang-up for me. But it is, and was, a statement here. Until, this is the key. This is the breakthrough. The pipe is not a pipe, really. Obviously, there is symbolism at work here. I saw that from the beginning. And I looked at the literal aspects of the pipe strip to gain insight into the metaphors at play. I worked at a newspaper printing press for 18 months in the late 1980s. I was learning the literal to inform the gestural, the subliteral, the in-between. John reading this newspaper means so much more than just John reading the newspaper. But how could you ever hope to decipher the puzzle without knowing everything there is to know about newspapers? Okay. For example, John holds his newspaper up in his left hand, thumb gripping the interior. I learned that this particular grip here was the newspaper grip of the 19th century aristocrats, and this aristocratic grip was part of a contention that influenced the decision to move forward with prohibition in the United States in the early 20th century. So John's hand position is much more than that. It is a comment on class war and the resulting reactionary culture. But I didn't know about the aristocratic newspaper grip until I came across some microfiche archives in the printing press. It's about information. It's about information. You have to take it apart. And the breakthrough on the smoking cat came late. Just 8 years ago, actually. Smoking cat is an industry term. It's what the smoking industry calls a tattletale teenager who tells on its friends after they've tried smoking for the first time. And it is actually a foreign translation, bastardization from the term smoking rat. but the phrase was confused when secret documents went back and forth between China and America. These documents are still secret, and the only reason I know about the term is because I know a man, my friend. Let's call him Timothy, yeah. Yes. It's a fake name, for his protection. Timothy worked for Philip Morris for 16 years, and he had seen the documents. And when he told me, it was an aha moment. And he said, "But how? How could this cartoonist Jim Davis know about this obscure term from the mid-70s, used exclusively by a few cigarette companies?" This is still a mystery to me. But I connect the dots by noting Jim Davis's childhood experiences on a farm. He must have seen something. What could it be? Timothy went on to tell me there was one particular smoking cat, a boy, from, yes, Indiana, a boy named Ernie Barguckle, who became a thorn in the side of tobacco companies for several years. He did more than tattle to his parents. He and his family took legal action, and they eventually received a huge settlement payout. But that name is too similar. Ernie Barguckle. John Arbuckle. Jim Davis must have used this. There's more here. Ernie Barguckle spent nearly half of that settlement money on experimental medical procedures to cure his impotence. He was impotent. So, he was a smoking cat with a metaphorical pipe that did not work. Are you starting to see the layers here? This is exciting stuff. You start to get a whole picture here, and it forms the work. Yes, it's just remarkable. Jim Davis took these raw ideas, these pieces, and he transformed them into a smart social commentary that is also ravishingly beautiful. I have cried. I've cried and cried over this piece. It just gets in my soul. I try to explain this to people. I have. The newspaper articles about Ernie Barguckle. People have fought me on this. They don't see it, or they are close-minded. How could a comic strip about a cat smoking a pipe mean any more than that? But it is more. When I feel spiritual, or start to think existentially, I see this comic. Here's something from 1981 that I wrote in thinking about the implications of this strip. This is just an excerpt here. There's more before and after, but this part seems to be the essence of it. If a comic about a cat smoking a pipe can be the only thing in the universe, then maybe this is the strong evidence for that. Many of you say, "Oh, but I am not blind. I have never been blind." But when you truly see, you will understand just how truly blind you were once, even to think it right to say you were not blind. What does a blind man see? Blackness, darkness, blankness, blank darkness, dark blankness. The absence of things, quite literally no thing. No things, nothings. So you see nothing, and I bring you into the light. A cat has your pipe. You've been blind. Do you understand this? The cat has your pipe. You can't fully immerse yourself. You don't have the light. You don't have the radiance, the radical light, the radically radiant light of truth and truth belonging, and nature of light and loving, truthful radiance. So don't be bold and make bold statements. I know of you. The cat has your pipe. The cat has your pipe. Remember that. That writing, well, it's kind of right. It's kind of rough, you know? Kind of an early 80s feel, and I see that. But I'm still proud of it. Sometimes I imagine that it is the editorial column of the newspaper John Arbuckle is reading. It's an exercise in recursion. It's like a vortex opens up. It's like you hold up two mirrors up to each other. One is reality, the other is a cartoon strip. Let's see here. Oh, yes. I must bring this up because I think, surely, Jim Davis is speaking on multiple levels by including the details set before us in the comic. Notice the glimpse of John Arbuckle's foot in the first panel. The size of the shoe would indicate that maybe the man just has small feet. But a deeper investigation takes us into the foot binding rituals of certain Asian cultures, inflicted usually on women for the desire of men. This practice was incredibly painful and crippling. Notice the glimpse. No. Aha! No, Jim Davis. Mr. Davis here is presenting us with a man, or rather, man, who engages in foot binding, a body modification for women, on top of being without his pipe or impotent. This is a man facing extreme inner turmoil. The panels tell that story, subconsciously. Notice the background wall shading of the first panel points inward, toward John in the second panel, and the sharp tapered end of the purple pipe in the third frame also points at John in the second panel, inward. The eye is drawn to the center panel. You can connect these points and draw a triangle across the panels, and this triangle will align with the reoriented points of John's collar. This is majestic artwork. And to uncover this hidden order is bliss like I've never known. Comforting in an empty world. I can't help but read the thought bubble over and over again. Now where could my pipe be? Now where could my pipe be? It is a profound question. Why am I here? What is my purpose? It is a reflection and self-examination here. It is facing the dust and the misery of a cold, careless universe. You can feel the weight of it. But where could my pipe be? One imagines the author, Jim Davis, teetering on the edge of insanity, his rationality, his lucidity, hovering over the void. You can feel the weight of it. And he seeks the truth. You can see it in the line quality of the drawings here. The thoughtful, controlled outlines mixed with the occasional chaotic scribblings at work in the shadows. And Garfield's dark stripes. It's almost as if Garfield is chaos himself. Yes, he is the embodiment of chaos, disorder, hatred, fear, thievery, death, destruction, desolation. These are the things Garfield represents. He stole the pipe. He sits with his back to John Garfield. Garfield, this chaos cat, has turned his back on everything, everyone. One recalls the great existential forces in literature. Camus Marsault, Kafka's Gregor Samsa, or others. Garfield the cat sees the hopelessness of life. And of which, yes, this is why Jim Davis has chosen smoking. It represents a recklessness, a disregard for what some would define as the beauty of life. Garfield may die from the nicotine, he may not. He defies life. He sits defiant, saying nothing. But he looks as if he could say, "Then let me die. It does not matter. It does not matter." And we are faced with this. Could John behave the same? Is John the glimmer of hope? He seems to be unsure. Again, his question, "Now where could my pipe be?" indicates that he's wrestling with his own existence. The center panel centers the issue. And again, this harkens to many of the great religious works of art. I'm talking about the pipe strip in relation to religion. It's interesting to assign the roles of God and anti-God, or as many know him to be, the devil, or on a much larger scale, simply the forces of good and evil. Garfield the thief cat, evil and malicious. He is the devil, placed to the right. And note the two forms of John. The John on the left, still innocent, still draped in the delightful and lack of knowledgeful existence. He is the humans in the Garden of Eden. He feels for his pipe, but he has yet to eat from the tree. And Garfield, the sinister serpent. And notice how Jim Davis has framed this. The center John is locked in a struggle between his innocence and his knowledge of the truth. Knowledge of the existence of evil. It is stunning. The great struggle and struggle that transcends time. And Jim Davis floats over all of this as creator. The god of sorts in his own right. And he presents this cautionary message to us all. It is as if he is speaking from high, and he is saying unto our awaiting ears, Where will you be when the cat reveals himself? I can tell you where you'll be. You'll have a choice. You will face endless suffering and eternal misery. You have the choice of that, and you can be forced, beaten down with barbarians who claw at each other just for a view of salvation. They'll tear your eyeballs out and rip your gizzards from end to end. They worship this cat, this false idol, this evil, horrible cat. Do not be seduced by the cat and his pipe. Garfield, thy name is a mark of the demons of hell. Something like this, and to those listening, it is a stark reminder of how to follow the path of the first panel, John. Be humble, be grateful, honor the law, honor thyself, be true, and be good, and no harm will come to you. Pray for salvation, and it will be granted unto you. Be like John Arbuckle, as he lowers his head. Be like John Arbuckle, as he lowers his paper, and he turns his head. Bow with John Arbuckle, and praise unto Creator Jim Davis, and banish Demon Garfield from your life. So what is all this? What am I saying? What does all this mean? Why is this one comic strip so important to me? And why do I feel the need to share this? Obligation. I have an obligation to you all. This is redemption. This is a belief in redemption. A sacrifice of all the obvious trappings in false modern life. Look at the simplicity of this strip. In the strip, look at the simple clothes John wears. Look at his simple, basic furniture, no adornments on the wall. Even the very pipe this cat, Garfield, has stole. It is a plain, modest pipe. And I have adapted this way of life. It speaks to me. In our times, well, you don't need me to point out the hyperbole of our times. You have children being born 8 or 9 at a time. You have money being spent on a Hollywood movie, and more money spent than some nations can spend, feeding their starving people. Torture distrust. Look around you, it's overwhelming. What can you contribute? And every day you look in the mirror, I look in the mirror, and I hold this comic up to the mirror. I look into the mirror, and I look at this little comic strip. Be humble, be thankful. It is a reminder. Be respectful. You are a statue, you are fragile. And when you break, when you shatter, where will those pieces go? Ask, 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 ask this question. Will you ask? Humankind is only as great as you. You, the individual. It begins and ends with you. You must treat this expedition, this search, this life, with the reverence and intensity found only in the smallest sticks, the littlest leaf, the tiniest stone, the most minuscule grain of sand on the beach of billions. This is the secret. Do you want the pipe? Do you want to know where the pipe is gone? You ask yourself. You ask. You ask. You ask. Now where could my pipe be? When I was a young man, remember now, I first read this comic when I was 18 years old, ages ago. But I was youthful, vibrant. For weeks I tried to hide. And I didn't hide that a comic strip was having such a profound effect on me. I was much like John Arbuckle. In this middle panel, he says, "Now where could my pipe be?" I'm going to take a brief intermission now. where was I? Now where could my pipe be? You look into his eyes, his half-lowered eyes, and you think to yourself, now, surely, John. Oh, there's feedback. Hold on, folks. Now, surely, John. Oh my. Huh. Now, surely, John. Surely you cannot be this naive. This is nothing new for you. And if you've read more of the Garfield comic strips by Jim Davis, you can understand what I am saying now. Garfield the cat does things like this all the time. He will take things from John. Food, items, anything. This is very nature. So when you see this, and you want to say, John Arbuckle, come now, you are lying to yourself. You are lying to yourself and to all of us if you pretend to not have any idea of what your pipe has gone and where it has gone. Perhaps you think you've left it somewhere, but you are not so forgetful. You are lying to yourself. Yes. You are lying to yourself, John Arbuckle, and you know that Garfield has the pipe somewhere deep down. You know this. You don't even need to think the question. That was me when I saw the strip. 1 week passed, and each morning I'd open the drawer and slam it shut again. I would go to look at the comic, but I'd pause and think, no, I don't need this comic. I don't need it. I don't need to look at it. But there I was, lying to myself. I did need to see it, and so I did. It's cathartic. You give in, and that is the transition from the second panel of life to the third panel of life. It is a simple story structure. The passage from the second act to the third, the twilight of things. John gives into his suspicions. He knows the truth. He always known the truth. He yells out, Garfield! 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 It is like pressure from a steam valve being released. The build-up is unbearable, and then whoosh, it's gone. So, it is like this. When I speak about the truth, the light, the radiance, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is the essence of this brilliant work of art. The practical mixing, meeting, and agreeing with the spiritual. It is all here. But spirituality is not an easy thing to confront. You might find yourself able to wrap your mind around a simple math problem or a basic newspaper article or whatnot, but intellect is much less subjective. What is spirituality, and how have I found spiritual peace and serenity in Garfield? A long time ago, after I encountered the pipe strip, I spent some time, as I mentioned before, soul-searching. When something impacts you or alters your very perception so greatly, there is a long period of confusion recovery time. It's as if you don't know who you are anymore, and that can be a very scary prospect. Especially if you thought you had a good grasp on that sort of thing. Imagine if Jim Davis did not know who he was. Would he be capable of shaping a cultural landscape as he's done? No. No, of course he wouldn't. And how about his characters, John? What if Jim Davis suddenly woke up and didn't know who John was? What if he couldn't make the informed decisions to accurately depict Garfield's personality? Because of, well, he could no longer specify or demarcate the boundaries of Garfield's behavior. What kind of comic would that be, you see? So draw the parallel. I saw this comic, and yes, I was disorientated. And if I didn't reconcile this issue with myself, what kind of person would I be? Undoubtedly dire circumstances, but remember, this was not a math problem. This was not an article. This was not something I could just figure out. And as skeptical as I was, I realized that faith and spirituality were avenues that required exploring. At first I tried long nights reading Garfield by candlelight, or aromatic meditation settings while thinking of Garfield, but nothing snapped. Nothing clicked. I still felt lost, but I kept it up. I hired a shaman, and a young personal yogi Sikh guru, Avram Dahab Singh Sahib. I pushed and pushed, determined to find myself, and then a miracle happened. Upon retrieving my morning paper to clip Garfield, the comic, I noticed a young girl selling lemonade 2 houses down. She sat occupied at her stand. She had not a single customer in sight. So I approached. I saw that she was coloring. I looked at her drawing. 3 rectangular boxes. A man in a blue shirt. An orange cat. I knew what this was. Even in her crude scribbles, I knew exactly what this was. She was drawing a Garfield comic. I looked at her words, and I saw that, in her strip, John asked Garfield to retrieve a newspaper. Funny, since I'd done that just myself, right now. Garfield is sarcastic, but he agrees to it. He returns and calls John Sahib. John exclaims that the paper's all chewed up, but then Garfield says, and I quote, "Sahib asks fish, paper is wet. Sahib asks cat, paper is holy." I remember the words, and I ran back to my house and thought, how odd that Sahib shows up in the strip, and my spiritual advisor's name is Avram Dab Singh Sahib. Coincidence, surely, but nonetheless, I spent the next 16 hours poring through my clipped Garfield comics, looking for the strip this young girl had been coloring. I couldn't find it, and I eventually fell asleep, right on my kitchen table. Next morning, I retrieved my paper again, and I clipped the Garfield comic. The date was July 12th, 1983. There it was. The Sahib strip in all of its glory. The girl had been drawing the next day's strip. So, I ran out of my house. I ran back to where she was, but she was gone, and in place of the lemonade stand was a for sale sign. They'd moved out. I rushed back to my house to call Aram, but I was informed he'd move away as well. I reeled for several hours, and then it connected to me. It was meant to be. It was meant to be this way. Jim Davis, John, Garfield. It was always meant to be this way for me. They move to the forefront, and everything else fades away. Everything else. The girl, the lemonade stand, Avram Dab Singh Sahib. It had all existed to show me the way. And when I'd found the way, everything else melted away. It was a beautiful miracle. And if July 27th, 1978, the day I first saw the pipe strip, was the first day of my life, then that day, July 12th, 1983, was the second day of my life. Just like the second panel. I've never looked back. Garfield has transformed me. And I am a man, born anew because of Garfield. When I was in my mid-30s, I was interviewed for a documentary. It was a documentary on the subject of cat behavior. Now, I've had cats my whole life. I have 3 cats now, and at the time of this documentary interview, I had 4 cats. I sat down for the interview, and I was joined by a veterinarian who specialized in felines. Dr. Carolyn Wilmets was her name, I believe. And the doctor discussed color blindness in animals and how it affects their behavior. She specifically brought up the fact that cats are red-green colorblind. They can see colors, but they can't tell the difference between red and green. And look at the color choice in the strip here. Garfield sits on the green floor behind a pinkish red wall. I heard this and I immediately pulled a copy of the comic from my wallet to show the doctor. I moved so fast. I'm sure I nearly scared her. I pointed to the paper and I said, like this, look, like at this here. This cat, Garfield, he's colorblind, he must be. That must be the answer here. Like this. As overexcited as I was, I managed to take in a response. She said yes, a cat in this room would have a hard time differentiating the wall from the floor. Add that to a cat's known spatial confusion, and you have a makings of a cat rage room. Now, she informed me, this isn't exactly common knowledge among cat owners, but a seasoned cat owner, or someone particularly perceptive, would have picked up on it. So what's incredible here is not only is Garfield's behavior symbolic of the devil, and all the evil constructs in the world, but also it is rooted in science and scientific fact. Look at that. You cannot spell fact without cat. Just a little joke there. Just some wordplay. But getting back on track. And you can't spell track without cat. Okay. I digress. I gotcha. Enough kidding around. It is established here that Garfield is in a rage. An ultimate rage of fury and hatred caused by color blindness. We know the what and the where. But do we know the why? Well, yes. We know the what. We know the why. But hold on. Let us examine the how. The how of his rage is particularly interesting here. We've looked at his posture and called it powerful, in control, statuesque, etc., etc. Composed rage. It's peculiar. And I've talked to a number of psychologists. I've talked to a number of psychologists and psychiatrists, and even a couple of anger management therapists about this concept. Could we see the same kind of behavior in a human? Is Garfield representative of something more specific than just chaos and rage? Deciphering this is going to take some perseverance for sure. The psychologists pointed to a phenomenon in humans, and yes, I believe, and one of the anger management counselors brought it up as well. The idea that people oftentimes bottle their rage. Garfield, the cat here, well, he could be bottling his rage inside, shoving it deeper into his cat gut, to ignore and deal with at a later time. Well, no. That's not exactly right. Garfield has already acted out. He's stolen the pipe. He's smoking the pipe. He's already dealt with his anger. He's already lashed out. So, psychologically, what is going on here? What is this cat doing? And how does it impact his owner, John Arbuckle, psychologically? Well, Garfield is angry. He is acting on his anger. But is this passive anger or aggressive anger? Passive. It is passive because if Garfield had a problem with John specifically, he's choosing a passive way of dealing with that problem. He's not confronted John and said, John, I have a problem with the way you've decorated this room. As a cat, I am colorblind, and this room sent me into a rage. You've created a rage room for me here, and I don't like it. I want you to change it. Instead of confrontational approach, the Garfield has chosen to steal John's pipe. And that, it turns, angers John. But John decides to be aggressively angry and yell at Garfield. So now, instead of a calm conversation here between two respectful parties, you have two heated, angry individuals, each with a problem and no direct line of solving it. The layered emotions here tell a story with tight, focused brevity that would make Hemingway weep. This is an entire drama in just 3 panels, people. But let's not be remiss and miss the humor of the situation, the absurdity of it all. For certainly there is a reason that the visual shorthand for drama includes both a crying mask and a laughing mask. Comedy and tragedy complement each other and meld to create drama. Tension, the height of humanity, the peak of art that reflects back to us our own condition.
And here, in its basis form, we can laugh at this comic. Yes, comic! In which a cat smokes a pipe. When was the last time you've seen such a thing in your life? Never, I presume. I certainly never have. The Greek muse Tyla's presence is strong in this work of art here. Comedy. It is comedy. And if you look at the structure again, you'll see this perfect form of thirds work magically for the transition of, yes, a joke. The joke is as old as time. Even cavemen told jokes. And the joke here is that John has lost his pipe, or he thinks he has, but lo and behold, it is the cat, Garfield, who has the pipe. Surprise, surprise, the cat is smoking. Again, the transition from setup to punchline takes place between the second and third panels. But make no mistake, the comic is more than just a comic. Yes, it is funny. Of course it is. But it is operating at the height of sophisticated humor, on par with any of Shakespeare's piercing wit. On one hand, Garfield the comic, with John the man, humor is art. The other hand, Garfield comic, with John the man, stirring, no, riveting drama. Has everything. It is tension and release. Tension and release. A cycle. I keep returning to this idea because it's so omnipresent. And yes, you could, and yes, I have done this on more than one occasion. You could print this comic strip onto a giant piece of paper. The dimensions would be something like 34 inches by 11 inches. Now, tape the ends together with the comic facing inward. Stick your head in the middle of this Garfield comic loop and read. Start at the first panel. John is reading the newspaper. He feels for something on the end table. Second panel. He sets the newspaper down. Something is not right. Where could my pipe be, he thinks, and then the payoff. The third panel. Garfield has John's pipe and is smoking it. But, aha! The paper is in a loop around your head, so that you can see that once again, John is in his seat, reading the paper, and so on and so on. You can literally read the comic strip for an eternity. I spent many a relaxing Sunday afternoon reading the strip over and over, reminded of the Portuguese death carvings which always begin and end with the same scrawled images. So, this idea of repetition, of the beginning being the end, and the end being the beginning, it's not new. It is an ageless tradition among the best storytellers humanity has ever offered. And I am not wrong to include cartoonist Jim Davis in that exalted set for this particular strip alone. I am not foolish enough to deny that great art is subjective, divisive even, and that some people see this Garfield comic and shrug with no real reaction. But I will say that I believe everyone in the world should see it. At the very least, see it. You should all see it, read it, spend some time with it, spend an hour reading. What's an hour? Yes, you could watch some television program, you could play some fast-paced video game, or computer games. Yes, you could do all those things. But it's just an hour. And if you could give this strip a chance, if you could look into John Arbuckle's eyes, if you could look into John Arbuckle's soul, you might find that you will really be looking into your own soul. It is self-discovery. What I'm talking about here, you have the opportunity, the possibility. It could change you, don't be afraid. You know, just last week, I was eating lunch near the municipal court, like I do every Thursday, and there was a plumbing van parked out in front, and a man, a plumber, would step out of the court and retrieve something from this every so often. A few times this happened. I thought nothing of it. Just a plumber doing some work at the municipal court. But then he came out and he looked through his van and it was clear. You couldn't find something. I noticed and I thought, well, that's sort of similar to the Garfield comic in a way. Someone looks for something, can't find it, but yes, that probably happens billions of times a day around the world. But then, this plumber puts his hands on his hips. Then he scratched his head, and he said aloud, "Now where could my pipe wrench be?" Well, at this, I leaped off the bench, sandwich still in hand, and I rushed over. I shouted, "What is that you said?" He looked at me and said, "What? I can't find my pipe wrench." No. I said, "No. Say it. Say it like the way you just said it." He scratched his head and repeated, "Now where could my pipe wrench be?" I slapped him on the back and said, "Garfield!" He looked so confused, so I said it again. Then I said, "Your orange cat took it." Then I laughed and laughed. He smiled and went back to the courtroom. I walked away knowing that the plumber and I, two complete strangers, bonded over this Garfield comic. You see, life imitates art. Becomes a common ground. I have a feeling that if I see this plumber again, we will be sharing stories like two old friends, because we have been united by art. We have a common love for Jim Davis and his characters, his writings, the humor, the drama, that rascal Garfield the cat. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering what I was having for lunch that day, it was a ham sandwich with an apple and potato chips in a bag. I had a soda as well. I think it's important to view the pipe strip in philosophical terms. We've touched briefly on the notion of existentialism. That theme is very prevalent in this strip. Garfield is, in fact, a modern existential anti-hero. But if Garfield embodies the bewilderment in a meaningless life, what is John? What are the telltale signs that inform John's philosophical standpoint, his approach, what style of thinking he represents? John is predicted as being grounded in the material world, a world of things. He is surrounded by objects, and he touches these objects, he interacts with them. The newspaper, the end table, the chair, his clothes. All these physical things make up John's world. In some sense, even his cat Garfield is an object to him, a thing. The first ideology that comes to mind when thinking of objects in the tangible world is pragmatism. Is John Arbuckle a pragmatist? Is his beliefs stem from a useful, coherent view of his environment. A sort of cause and effect understanding of his world helps him A. deduce that his pipe is missing, and B. catches his cat, Garfield, using his pipe. This kind of empirical and logical thinking lends credence to the idea that John is indeed a pragmatist, although it is hard to entirely ignore the rest of the Garfield comic canon. While Garfield is constantly anarchic and embraces the chaos and absurdity of life, John Arbuckle exhibits an erratic, unpredictable mix of philosophical behaviors. At times, he is borderline delusional, an idealist, an almost slap-happy version of Don Quixote. I probably butchered that name, I'm sorry. Other moments, he is rigid, nearly to the point of being obsessive, somewhat like a structuralist, and certainly has streaks of sarcasm and negativity that might classify him as a skeptic. But isn't there some universal truth in this approach? How can any one man, how can John Arbuckle be just one thing? How can any of us be just one thing? We're an amalgamation of ideas, emotions, conducts and functions, thoughts and feelings. John Arbuckle may very well inhabit tenets of nearly every major philosophical tract known to man. We all might. Characters are reduced to make them recognizable, definable. A story needs a good guy, a story needs a bad guy, but rarely is one person defined in such black and white terms, even Garfield with all of his bad behavior. with his motivation and general ne'er-do-well attitude, can be kind and thoughtful, even Garfield. You just have to find that rare strip. Speaking philosophically about the entire Garfield franchise, it is an incredibly accurate depiction of life. Its bold lines and bright colors are merely a facade, a red herring, a lie. This cartoon is not a cartoon at all. It is a caricature. It's not a caricature despite adopting caricature as its visual and tone. But I don't really like to speak in broad sweeping generalizations about Garfield. The comic has been running for over 30 years, and to try and boil that down, well, it's impossible. I think the only way that any historian is worth his salt will agree with me is to look at individual moments, isolated instances, single comic strips. Can I discuss this one comic strip in the extent of the entire run of Garfield? Yes. I can do that just as any film historian might analyze one movie in relation to the history of all movies, or a war enthusiast might look at a single battle's impact on the entire war. The pipe strip is just an instance of the lives of John and Garfield. Perhaps John is not a pragmatist at all. Let's look at this again. Maybe John is exhibiting the traits of a rationalist thinker. His question, now where can my pipe be, is a clue that his thought process stems from the early rationalist questions posed by René Descartes. The well-known quote, "I think, therefore I am," attributed to Descartes, is applicable. Another close look at the strip, and we see that Jim Davis chose to draw John thinking his question, now where can my pipe be? John does not speak the question out loud, so Jim Davis is also exploring the mind-body duality. John's question operates on the level of a literal question, but it also examines the nature of reality. Jim Davis, his approach tells us something about the human condition. John's thoughts remain the focal point of the strip. The comic is, quite literally, centered around his thought. Now where could my pipe be? This is his reality. This is where cognition and the power and function of the mind take over, as Plato believed. The body is a shell for John Arbuckle's eyes. For John Arbuckle. Yes. He can use his physical body to read the paper or cross his legs, but these inputs of touch, sight, hearing, etc., these senses are the triggers of the mind, as we see here. The mind is something greater. It is the originator of ideas, forever immortal. Immortality through thought, a major theme in literature and philosophy. And isn't that what Mr. Jim Davis himself has achieved? I mean, will he live forever? The universe will continue to spread and spread outward, and entropy will turn a chaotic infinity into a homogeneous and controlled system. This will take billions of years, and in that time, humans will push technology to heights we can't imagine. We'll explore and inhabit space. We will occupy more and more of the universe, just as time allowed our ancestors to multiply in numbers and populate more and more of the earth. And as specific people come and go, their physical bodies will be born and grow and die, but their thoughts will remain. And Jim Davis Comics, his glorious Garfield comics, are recorded ideas of what is an idea? Where does it live? How does it manifest itself? Can it live forever? Will it live forever outside these physical husks of our bodies? And John Arbuckle and Garfield started merely as thoughts, but they become so much more. That old cliche rings true. They've taken on a life of their own, and a life may not be what we think life brings to mind, a beating heart, breathing lungs and blinking eyes, but real life is in our imaginations, and who better embodies the definition of imagination if not a simple man, a cartoonist who puts his ideas to paper so that they may live on, so that our children and our children's children and their children's children can access the wealth of ideas that have accumulated thus far. They will plug themselves into an information grid, They will have access. They will read every Garfield comic 80,000 years from now. A child will see a simple John Arbuckle reading a newspaper. He will feel around for something, but that is something is not here. He will lift his head and think, now where could my pipe be? And Garfield will be smoking the pipe, and John will yell Garfield, and what then? 80,000 years from now. The child reading the comic will smile, and that smile will transcend space and time and the physical limitations of this existence, whatever they may be, however many dimensions exist. There will always be a Garfield. There will always be its creator, Jim Davis. Thank you.